dedication of being here, Madam President.
Is you giving up football tonight?
No,
Oh.
but Diane's had an off down the Cape this weekend, so the good thing is I can eat to my heart's content.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
okay. I'm going to call the special meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order on Thursday, September 12, 2024, at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. The prayer will be offered by Alderman Clee, and Alderman Thibodeau will lead us in the pledge to the flag for 2 nights in a row.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty of managing the affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with a spirit of unity and understanding which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. So help us, God. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance, please.
Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderwoman Timmons. Alderman Moran. Alderman Thibodeau.
Here.
Alderman GOV.
Here.
Alderman Lopez. Alderman Sullivan.
Here.
Alderman Clemmons. Alderman Senate.
Here.
Alderman Jettie. Alderman Thibault. Alderman Clee is here. Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderwoman Kelly. Alderman Wilshire.
I'm here.
Madam President, you have 8 present.
Thank you. Tonight we have a presentation by Pennachuck Water, and I'm going to recognize Chief Executive Officer of Pennachuck, John Bovair.
Thank you. As far as the advancement of the slides, is there a, thank you.
Yeah.
There, okay, right with you?
And if you have any problems, just give me a holler and I'll turn the page for you.
I certainly will. Thank you very much for having us. We have our certain title slides that we have, and we'll hopefully get these advanced. Is it on?
Should be.
Let's see. Let's just double check. Give me a sec. We'll try it one more time.
Let's see if I have to do.
Just hit the up
I can do that.
Should I hit the red button? Does that eject me or?
You should be so lucky.
This out of the way
Is
here.
this the
Sure.
PDF? Yeah. Oh, it's the PDF.
Oh, this is the PDF that's here?
So it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, it's not in presentation mode, okay. So let me just see if I can. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to do it for you then.
Okay. I'll
Page
just-
down on the keyboard might do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just tried doing page, okay. there.
Perfect. You can
Just
leave it
give me a
right.
holler and I will
Sure.
page you down. You want
You can
page
leave-
down?
Yes. Thank you very much. We'll leave it right there.
Just
So,
say down and I'll do it.
okay. So thank you for having us on a special meeting here tonight. I want to just really start with a quick overview, just to kind of set the stage of where we're going with this. Then we'll follow up with a number of introductions, just to let you know who's all here supporting this effort for us. What we're putting before you tonight is a proposal that Pennachuck has put forth to merge our 3 regulated utilities, Pittsfield Aqueduct Company, Pennachuck East Utility, and Pennachuck Waterworks into a single utility of Pennachuck Waterworks. Basically, as the city of Nashua is the sole shareholder for this, the city must approve, the Board of Aldermen must approve this merger for it to go forward in any way, shape, or form. We see a lot of benefits for the merger. The vast majority of customers, including Nashua residents, would see a rate decrease as part of the company's proposal. There'd also be avoided some really steep rate increases in some of the surrounding communities, especially primarily in the PEU system as well, but also two rates that are increasing amongst all ratepayers, especially those at the lower income and fixed income levels as well too. One of the key things that this does, it will preserve the revenue stream that allows the company to provide a sum of money each year for the city to pay off their bonds that they use to acquire the company. We'll also notice, because we have one utility instead of three, we are going to see some reduced administrative costs, primarily in the legal arena, in the number of rate filings and things. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We don't have to do as many of them. So it makes it a little bit less time for our friends. We love our attorney friends, but we need to, we like to be able to keep doing our job. We're hoping to explain the merger a little bit more, talk a little bit about the Public Utilities Commission process. Again, some more benefits of the merger, and we're able to actually stand before you and discuss the rates that the company has put forward that we feel through the process so far that we're reaching and really approaching some form of consensus amongst the parties that are involved with the rate case. So that's good news, yes. So here with me, I've introduced to me, but also with me, I have our Chief Operating Officer, Don Ware, behind me, George Torres, our Chief Financial Officer, Chris County, our Director of Operations, Tara King, our Director of Revenue and Customer Operations. We have several members of the Board of Directors here, Scott Flagel, Debbie Novotny, John, excuse me, I want to make sure I get the right names here. John, you messed me up. Yeah, you did, okay. And then we've got George Bauer, that is here, who's the chairman of the board. And let's see, John is from Londonderry. George represents the Merrimack Valley Water District as part of the required board member, and the others are all residents meeting the board requirements for Nashua. Also, too, is Jim Steinkraus, the attorney with Rath, Young, and Pignatelli, and Marcia Brown Law. They are all, I almost forgot, Carol Ann Howe, our secretary, is back there too. So we brought everybody in case we know there's going to be questions, and I want to make sure that we have the people to answer those questions and help me out. You can go down one. Yep, next one. There we go. So it's always helpful to me, because this is a process that looks forward, is to really take a look backwards and see where we've been, so that we know and we get some guidance on where we need to go in the future. And there's a really strong history associated with all this. And again, it all kind of really stems, from 2012, eminent domain, large sum of money paid to buy the outstanding shares of stock from Pennachuck, set up a process by which company revenues would pay back the city for that purchase. Approved by the New Hampshire PUC. We've retained the corporate structure as more or less that it existed, with a different style of board of directors. And we really essentially, instead of being a for-profit utility like we were before the acquisition, we are technically still a private utility that can make a profit, but the way that our rates are structured and the way that our revenues are received, we are really not making a profit anymore. So it's cost in, cost out, and that's where we're at right now. Slide down. There's some more historical perspectives on this, and I added these in. One is from our webpage, which describes the city's acquisition, so that anybody that's really curious can take a read of that. And I also included a web link to the Special Water Committee's meeting from back in March. And Alderman Klee was very gracious to allow us to present a history for the new members there, and Don Ware. I said, how long were you at the meeting? And he said, about an hour and a half. And I looked at the size of the minutes when they came out, and I said, oh boy, wow, you guys were busy. I had to miss that meeting, by the way. All right, slide down. All right. So when we look at the governance and responsibilities, I get to go to many different places and talk to other fellow water utility leaders. And you describe to them the ownership structure that we have, and there's nobody else like this. All right, and you sit there and say, well, we're not municipal, we're not private, and they look at you and they have no way of getting their arms around, what I'm trying to tell them. But we are in a very unique role, and it presents some really unique challenges as we work through not only things from financing, but also to, the banking structure that work, the regulatory structure, and a number of different things that we all have to be cognizant of because of who we are and what was created back in 2012. There are governance documents. You have articles of incorporation, and we have bylaws, again, all available and have pretty much existed, since the time of since 2012. The company is overseen by a board of directors. You're aware that each year you vote to approve a slate or a returning slate of board members. Presently, I believe we have 12 board members, more than 5+ are from the city of Nashua. We got Chairman Bauer, who is from the Regional Water District, and then the others, like John McGrath from Londonderry, and we have others that live in other systems that we own. Okay, slide down. I always kind of just look, again, trying to paint in my own mind a little bit of a story at how we continue to get here, and it's always helpful for me to keep going back. It was kind of ingenious at how we emerged out of the eminent domain. I remember being the chief engineer at the time and not really understanding too much of what was going on, and Don Ware would graciously explain that to me over and over again, and others at the time. But there's some documents that I like to keep referring to, and these are kind of some of the guiding principles of how the company was formed. There was a really strong desire to have stability, which I believe was created in 2012, albeit we've had to do a lot of work to really make the company part of things stable through the different rate mechanisms and stuff that we had to have, because we weren't municipal, we weren't private, so there was things that we had to do to ensure the financial success of the company. Second, the corporate structure pretty much stayed the same, and there was a governance system that really focused on the company and all customers, and so that continues today. And I think everything that we do, everything that guides us, is based on any customer, anywhere. We want to do what's best for our customers. The articles of incorporation are really what puts us here tonight. In order for us to merge, whether it be merge externally with any other company or merge anywhere or even combine our utilities like we are right now, out of Article 9, it really, number 4 is really sets the stage of why we're here tonight, because we would need your approval, the Board of Aldermen, approval to merge the 3 utilities, Pennachuck East, Pittsfield Aqueduct, into the sole surviving utility of Pennachuck Water Works. Okay, lots of words. I'm glad you can all look at them. So why now? Certainly when we started this process, we started coming through about a year and a half ago, and the numbers started coming out that there were going to be some serious increases to our smaller utilities as far as the rates that they had. They are small. They have smaller customer bases. They had over time in the short term over the last few years required capital upgrades. They were pretty much right, wrong, or indifferent. Some of them were disasters that are now in very, very good shape. So they're stable from the water, from the standpoint of a water utility. But again, we're looking at affordability and the like for some, especially some of those residents that are either fixed income or lower income, that those rates have become unaffordable and to a number of different criteria that we see. Again, it's those when we talk about quintiles in income. One of the key things that we looked at is as a trend across the nation and in the industry is really focusing on the affordability for those that are, how should I say, where the percent of their water sewer bills and everything are much, much greater than, you know, other parts of the population, right? The other thing that was going on at the time was a little bit of activity in Litchfield, quite a bit actually. Litchfield and Londonderry and Pelham, all three, you know, they were facing a number of different challenges and thinking of different things, and they said, well, we should just take our own systems over, okay? And there is still, you know, most of them spent, you know, they hired their consultants. Sometimes the state would support them in looking at the, you know, the status of their own water systems and whether it was feasible or not for them to acquire it. But the one thing we can say is everybody looked at, you know, how much they were paying now and how much they could do it on their own. And so there was kind of a risk, there's still a risk that these utilities might walk away, meaning that now our customer base goes down, presents a number of things. Alternatively, too, unlike if you're on municipal sewer, if I recall, if there's sewer, you got to be tied to it. Whereas in the water side of things, they can always drill a well. So if they feel that the water rates, they can walk away from the water system. There's nothing that we can do to say that you have to have, as long as you can meet the criteria of having a well with your septic system and your neighbors and meet the state requirements and whatever locals. So we still run that risk of people, you know, going off of our system over time. But realistically, it was the efforts of Londonderry, Litchfield, and Pelham that started to cause some concern. Again, these lower, if we start losing customers in these, what happens is now our customer base goes down, and that means there's fewer and fewer customers to pay the expenses of the company. So rates would have to go up. And a large portion of those rates, you know, a fairly decent number that we need to protect is the bond, you know, the reimbursement for the bond that we pay each, I think it's quarter, that we end up paying to the city to make up the amount that you all pay for your bonds that used to require us. So the more and more we do that, and the more we can, it starts to, you know, preclude or diminish the ability of those smaller utilities to contribute to that. Kind of sets some things in motion that may not be a good thing. So from the standpoint, too, if we have one utility, right now we have to file a rate case for each utility every 3 years. Okay, just kind of the standard operating procedure. Instead of filing 3, they cost money. Obviously, you know, all the fees, consultants, tons of time by the staff and everybody behind me. But if we have one utility, we just have to do one of those every 3 years. So immediately there's some savings there. Each year, we file a qualified capital project adjustment charge. So what we do is we do our capital projects just like the city and DPW does their capital projects, but each year when we do those and we put those in services, we have to start paying principal and interest and property taxes and the like on those assets that we put into the ground or build as part of a treatment facility. We need a revenue stream that covers the principal and interest right off the bat with those. So there was this, it evolved in the fact that now we have that ability through this QCPAC, as we call it. So it's right now, Pennachuck East and Pennachuck Waterworks have a QCPAC. Pittsfield Aqueduct Company does not have one. So each year we're filing 2 QCPACs. Now we only have to file 1 as a single utility. So again, some more, you know, savings and cost savings there. One interesting thing is when you look at Pennachuck, everybody thinks, you know, Pennachuck Waterworks, you got Nashua, Amherst, this core right here. But part of Pennachuck Waterworks is a small community water system over in Newmarket where I grew up. I remember it being built and then finding out that it was part of Pennachuck Waterworks. Well, we have Pennachuck East that's right across the river in Litchfield, and we have Londonderry, and you've got Pennachuck Waterworks scattered. A lot of these systems are all scattered in and about each other. So when these were created, it was really created as a sense of time. It was part of time, but not really. It just doesn't make
Do you want the next
sense.
slide?
What's that?
Do you want the next slide?
No, I'm almost on it.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry.
I'm talking a lot, but there's
Sorry.
a lot that.
No, that's
Sorry
okay.
about that, yeah. But I'm glad you're keeping me
Yeah.
mindful of that. So,
No, don't rush, don't rush.
again, we're really part of, you know, this kind of puts the utility where it really makes sense. You know, that we're all, it's really being operated as one. It's all the same employees work in the same utilities, and so it makes a lot of sense and certainly improves efficiency. We don't have to keep track of where the truck's going from which utility to the other. It's all going to one. So, all right. One other thing that's really key is Pennachuck Waterworks can go to the bond market. So we can get low-cost, long-term borrowing with Pennachuck Waterworks, but we can't with Pennachuck East Utility. Fortunately for Pennachuck East Utility, we do have a source of long-term capital through loans from a company called CoBank, but generally, almost generally 2.5% higher than long-term bonding, and I believe we can only get it for about 20 years as opposed to 30. Some of those are 30, correct, George? No, they're only 20. So you're paying back an asset that could be 80 years in life over a 20-year period, so the cost kind of goes up in what we have to pay back. But PAC, the small little PAC, has no access to long-term capital, not at all. The only capital that can get is small intercompany loans, and if we can ever qualify for state revolving loan funds or drinking and groundwater trust funds, then we have it. But PAC and PEU, have limited access to capital, and the idea would be as one utility, now we have access to the bond market and low-cost capital to reduce costs for all of our ratepayers. All right, slide down. Okay. As you said, this merger must be approved by the PUC. Okay, the merger obviously has to be approved by the merger of the utilities has to be approved by the Board of Aldermen. Right now, that is in, if you really want to dive into the details, PUC's webpage, their DW 23101 is the docket for this, and there is an enormous amount of material that sits there for you to take a look at. But anyway, as part of this, PWW, PEU, and PAC, along with the New Hampshire Department of Energy, which used to be members of the PUC staff, and it was broken out, so there's a separate Department of Energy now. The Office of Consumer Advocate, obviously the city of Nashua has been party to this, town of Bedford, town of Litchfield, and town of Londonderry. All right, so it's an involved process with a number of parties in there, and I do say that it's a process. We initiated this process in November of 2023. It started out as two dockets, one a rate case and one and the second one being the merger. Through all of some iterations and discussions and everything, it was agreed and made sense, and it was some procedural things that we had to iron out. It ended up becoming, one single docket under DW 23101. We've been through a number of things. We've had pre-hearing conference, defined a schedule, 6 sets of data requests from the DOE, 4 from the OCA, 3 sets from the town of Londonderry. All said and done over the last few months, we've answered over nearly, I think if I counted right the other day, we answered 484 questions or requests for more information as part of this process to make sure that we're getting that right. So a lot of that focus on how much money, what's the revenue required to run the company as it's combined. And when we started out with a number, literally through this whole process, out of about a $53 million requirement on an annual basis, that number really only changed a little bit over $100,000 as we started to iron out and make sure all the dots were connected. So it was a very, very much a process, I think, where we're at right now. All of this stuff that we're telling you here tonight is still subject to final PUC approval. There's still work that needs to be done by the parties that I mentioned on the previous slide, and all the final details. So even if this is approved, the final details of this need to be approved by the Board of Aldermen as well, too. You have the, in a way, through the merger, you have the final say on whether this is where to go through, and a little bit more on that. Okay, next slide, please. So, benefit of the merger, there's certainly benefits for the city and benefits for its residents. We right now are pursuing an integrated rate proposal for all customers, so everybody pays, it comes out of the same rate basis. All customers will be operating under a single tariff, so there's not a PEU tariff and a PEU tariff and sheets for another community and Wyndham. We're going to clean, again, efficiency. You talk about efficiency, trying to keep track of all of that. We're proposing a 3-tiered incline and block rate structure. Very common now. This is really starting to see a trend across the country. I think the AWWA in their journal, most recent journal, identified more than, I think it's about 58% of water utilities across the country now are going to an incline and block rate structure. 10, 15 years ago, that primarily was to try to encourage conservation, so people wouldn't waste water, okay? So if you had to pay more, that means you would turn your tap off or turn it down. Well, really never really materialized. Where we're seeing this now from the tier structure is certainly it's more for affordability. And affordability is coming into some of the AWWA manuals. It's coming into the thought process across the country at other utilities. So this is not, even though it's kind of novel for right here, it's really not a novel concept that we see in the industry. And for comparison here, this rate structure, okay, when I say CCF, that's one CCF is about 750 gallons. And I wish I could put all these things in gallons, but they commit us to saying using CCF, and I always have to do the math in my head. But that's, that's a fairly substantial it's a substantial amount of water, especially, if you think about it, if somebody used 10 CCF, that's 7,500 gallons a month. That's a lot of water for use. So what we really focus on is what we call it's the base use or non-discretionary use. That's the thing, that's the use that you need to wash your clothes, take a bath, do your dishes, drink, all those things that are essential to maintain in a household in that. And there is not, there's discretionary use that comes out of that. There are folks who use a substantial amount of water to irrigate. There's, wastefulness if they, have leaks in their, have leaks in their system. Well, it doesn't cost that much. I'm not going to pay a plumber to come fix my toilet, or a number of different things. But where we're at right now is what we wanted to do is focus on that base, that use that's, it's non-discretionary. It's what people need, and really focus too as well on ensuring that those that use the least amount that can afford it the least have a higher level or a better measure of affordability as we start to go and continue forward. It's trying to really protect and keep water affordable for the citizens and for your neighbors down the street, your constituents, and the like. And the result of this is that if you're a resident of Nashua and if you're a customer in Nashua and you use less than 14 CCF, remember, 10 is about 7,500, and do the math, add another, 2,800. That's, 14,000 gallons or so of water every month. That's a lot of water. If you use less than that, your bill under this proposal is actually going to go down. It will be less than what it is today under this rate structure. Again, I need to have this qualification. We're still in the process, and this still requires approval. Next slide, Trish. Thank you. All right. Again, some more facts. These are the numbers, and we're getting right to the end of this, so these are the numbers. Again, I talked about the 14 CCF. You pay a lower water bill. 98% of single-family residents use less than 14 CCF here in Nashua. Right? 63% of commercial businesses use less than 14 CCF. All right? Tier 1 encompasses 81% of all single-family Nashua residents and 73% of all Nashua customer types. Tier 1 and 2 encompasses 99% of single-family residents and 94% of all Nashua customer types. So most everything that's operating here is captured in those two tiers. The nice part about these two tiers is that discretionary use is paid for at a higher rate. So when we look at when we look at use dynamics between, Nashua and Bedford and Londonderry, you will find it's still very, the base use numbers are fairly still similar, but you start to see more discretionary use in folks with bigger lawns. They typically use a lot more water. So what happens then is that they are actually paying higher rates for that water that they're using on their lawn, as opposed to bathing their children and washing their dishes and things like that. Okay. The other interesting thing that came out of this is that right now we invest we have invested about a little over $7,900 per customer in the Pennachuck Waterworks system. All right. When we combine with PEU and PAC, we add another 8,000 customers to that customer base. Yes, there's capital that we have to support there, but the weighted cost of that capital, actually it goes down. And it goes down, why? It's because now we have more customers paying for the infrastructure. Right? When we do our next water main project in Nashua, again, at that ratio, if you look at it, it would be more expensive for a Nashua resident for us to do the water main in a standalone utility with a different rate structure than it will be under this one long-term. So the cost of capital is becoming less, and it's not because water main's getting any cheaper, pavement and everything isn't getting any cheaper. But one thing that protects us is having that larger customer base. And quite frankly, we've spent a lot of effort to date on some of those systems in PEU because they were not in compliance, and we had to make some upgrades. But a lot of them are pretty new, whereas here in Nashua, you have some of the oldest and some of the largest infrastructure in our system. You know, we still have a little under 40 miles of unlined cast iron pipe that was installed in the turn of not this past century, but the century before, that we're replacing now. You have a number of other types of pipe materials that were installed in the 40s and the 50s that are going to require replacement. So when you think about it, 80 plus miles within the next 20 to 25 years is a large amount of water main that we need to replace, and being able to have a larger customer base to help afford that. You're spreading those costs out amongst that larger base. All right, again, the larger base stabilizes revenue, and really having a stable utility allows us to continue to be able to fund and provide the funds for the city to repay its debt for acquiring us. Now, I'm out of breath. So if there's any questions, I got lots of people who will love to answer those if I can't.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, you said that most places use 14 CCF or less. How do you handle condo associations?
It's all over the place. Condo associations will have either a single master meter, and they'll have individual, or some have individual meters, some have multiple buildings with individual meters, but they're all treated as one customer at this point.
So are they going to get charged the higher rate because they use more than?
If, under present conditions, okay, but if you look at it, it all depends on who you are and where you are in the analysis of that bill. And I know it's certainly been a conversation that we have had internally and how that we get at that. But yes, you're gonna, if you are using, if anything that goes through that meter is at the higher rates, you do pay the higher volumetric charge, yes.
So a condo association would get billed for their entire water usage for the entire condo association, which would drive it up way over, or are you going to take an average of the number of units in that condo association?
Right. That's a really good one, because we were looking at that, and then the issue, Alderman Dowd, is right now, yes, we want to do that. We want to be able to look at that, but right now the data that we have for every facility, every condo, every multifamily, is not in a structure that we could look and say, okay, if we want to do that, what are the impacts, number one? Because what we're seeing is that we have a meter that uses a certain amount of gallons, but then when we do the calculations, we're seeing numbers that are all over the place. We see some that are 3 CCF per month per unit, and then we see some that are 30 for the number of units they had. Some kind of numbers there wrong, you know what I mean, as far as the number of units in those. So how do we ensure that we have the right number of units per building, and then set the billing system up to do that? We explored that real briefly in this process, and really came to the conclusion that we need to spend the next year, because remember, one of the things that's coming out of this is that we're proposing to be in another, we'll give it a year and do another rate case to true everything up, kind of like what we did when the city acquired Pennachuck, was to be able to go back, figure it all out, come back in a year and say, how did you get it right? right? But what we want to do is be able to engage all parties to say, if we do that, we really need good data that we can tie and bring back into a single common billing system. Yes, we could look at, for instance, I know where you live up on Kessler Farm, we could work, individually with all of them and say, okay, this is how many you have and this is kind of what the bills would be. But we also have 2,700 other multifamily accounts that we have to try to figure out.
So we have 495 units that we use, obviously they use a lot of water, and now you're gonna drive up maybe to the third tier cost,
Yeah.
which is going to be an excessive increase in the cost of the condo association. When you've got some townhouses that probably use a lot less, others, the houses use maybe more.
Yep.
Right now, they get a single bill, but the bill breaks out every single unit. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how you
Yeah, if-
handle. The other thing is, if you have a single-family house, for instance, and you use more than 14 CCF, and they go into the next rate structure, is all of that water gonna be charged at the higher rate structure, or just above the 114?
Well, what it will be is if they go to 14, they'll be getting charged the higher rate once they go over 7, which is the wintertime base demand that we see. So if you use 7, you're at the low rate. If you use 8, you get 7 at the low rate and then 1 at the high rate.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the idea is to try to capture those, because we do see that use creep up in the summertime, and usually that is discretionary use that drives those numbers.
Two other things. One was when, I'm gonna assume that the condo association go nuts if you try to charge them the higher rate, because they're using that much more water. So I think, you may have to negotiate with each one of the condo associations how you're gonna charge them, or come up with some plan. As you said, they're all different,
Right.
and,
And that's where we were at. A few days back, I think the company had looked at that, and we actually reached out to the towns to see what their assessors' databases are. We worked here with the city. The data's in there. It's hard to extract. It's hard to pull out in a timely manner that sets this up. So what we propose as part of, if this continues to go through settlement, is that we will all circle back in 2025 and really take a hard look at that data to try to determine, is there a way that we can extract it and make everything apples to apples, so to speak? And right now, it's just too difficult to make it apples to apples.
and the other thing is that I think you're involved in the charge rate is associated with the size of the input on the water main, especially for wastewater. Aren't you involved with the city on how
I'm gonna
wastewater gets
defer
charged?
To Tara, if you want to come up on the wastewater side?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So, right now, you get billed differently based on the size of the input of the water line, and that's associated with wastewater. The larger the
So for
valve, I
the
guess,
sewer billing, you
more
mean?
you get charged for,
The meter size, the city does use for their sewer billing. But that's not changing, that's the way, the rates are changing with this, but that's still the monthly customer charge. If I may, jumping back to the Kessler Farm situation or the condos, there's different situations, as John had explained, is a lot of the places that have been turned into, or what they're called condexes now, they're all single metered. So there's not one master meter for the entire building. Or there's situations like Kessler Farm, where there's meters in different buildings throughout the association. So Kessler Farm isn't one large, one single meter for the entire development. It's multiple meters throughout, which will minimize that higher tier for those areas.
the other thing is to the wastewater, there's a different rate in the summer because water use, the water lawns and used in pools isn't charged for the wastewater because it never goes down the sewer.
The sewer department?
So
Yeah.
if you're looking at a condo association, we have 3 pools. That's a lot of water. And if that's being charged at the same rate, as opposed to having a summer reprieve.
Well, I think that, yes, in the summer, the city does winter averaging for their sewer billing. A lot of the pools in the different associations have a single meter for that purpose, whether it's irrigation or the pools. So it would be, if there's 3 pools, they might have 3 meters to fill those, and it would be on its own without being the whole complex. But also, you're not emptying the pools every year, so it's just the
No,
additional.
you just bring them down.
Right. So
Plus
it wouldn't
there's
be like,
maintenance
you
in
know,
which they have to empty them, but
yeah,
they do handle a lot of water. But I can see a potential issue with condo associations. If you use the total water of the condo association, 495 units times the higher rate versus the lower rate, that's a lot of money. And right now, and the other thing is, all too often, condo associations like set their yearly condo fees based on a budget. And if anything changes within that budget year, it's almost impossible for them to change. So it should take effect when their budget takes effect. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
we do get requests from a lot of the associations in regards to rate changes for their budgets, and we do typically around this time. And we know that information, or being able to give them an estimate for the next year, as
Yeah,
best that we can.
Kessler Farms, 1st of January. But I got a feeling condo associations are different across the city,
Yes.
so.
Yeah,
Alderman Gouveia.
I told you I have people that can
Oh.
answer questions.
I'll deflect to the mayor first. He had his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
So thank you for coming, first of all. This is very informative. But if one of these smaller towns, Londonderry, Litchfield, you've given those examples, tried to separate, they would have to pay the utility for the value of the assets that they were acquiring or taking over, right? Do you have estimates as to what those might be with respect to any of those towns?
We actually have given those to their consultants as far as the book value. And Dawn behind me can speak a little bit more to that. But we have provided those numbers because we have the book values of those. The amount that was part, the value of them at the time of the acquisition in 2012. Any capital that we've invested in them adds on to that. Now, we have a lot of these, they have grown, but they had what's called kayak or contributed capital, which isn't part of the rate base. It wouldn't be recoverable and that type of thing, because we didn't pay for it. But yes, to answer your question, we do have that number. The other thing that we can't, and we tried to provide the history lesson to some of the communities, and I'm not so sure that they fully understood it was, but you remember when, during the eminent domain, when Nashua wanted just the Nashua assets, to kind of put this, in my words and not really the words that happened, that was going to cause harm to the other communities, and therefore then the price went up because they needed to put aside a whole bunch of money because now you're taking the guts out of it, so to speak, and you're left with these smaller utilities. If you look at PEU on its own, you move either Litchfield or Londonderry out, that's kind of on the same magnitude as Nashua, leaving the whole thing, if you think about it. So there's this other thing that will have to happen, and it will have to be run through the Public Utilities Commission to make sure it's equitable.
So you're not limited to book value in recovering the cost, as
Well,
I interpreted that last
right.
answer.
Yeah, well, we're not, it's typically, how should I say, it's probably not a negotiation. There's the book value, and then it's what somebody else decides is the harm. What's the harm? And we can provide information as to what that harm will be, but it will be likely the Public Utilities Commission that decides the harm that's left when that happens.
And there would probably be experts on both sides of that question,
Oh, yes, yes,
and potential litigation.
yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam President.
Alderman Gouveia.
Thank you, Madam President. I had a lot of the same questions as the mayor just asked, was about the towns who were looking at pulling out of it. But I think where I come from is the same as my colleague across the chamber. I represent a lot of condo associations and a small amount of apartments, but mostly condo associations, and I live in one personally. How I interpret this is if you're a single-family home, your rate's going down, but if you're in a condo or apartment, your rate is skyrocketing. And I would not support anything that's gonna target these type of households. That just wouldn't, that doesn't fly well with me, that anybody who is living in a condo or apartment is getting a different rate than somebody who has a single-family home. So this is a tough sell on me so far.
Yeah, I think message received. And again, like you said, this is something that came up through this process in order for us to adequately evaluate it, because there's no condo association that's alike. We have some that have condos and they're all individually metered. So they're a single-family home. That's great, okay? They fall right into it. We have some that are many, many, many units that all come through a master meter. We have some that are broken up into small little pieces that have a meter. And so it's not as large. We have some that have literally no landscaping. We have some that have tons of landscaping and that have tons of lawn. So I think what we have asked and what we were trying to do is to be able to get our hands wrapped around that part of it, because remember what we said, our goal is to come back and get this in place and then be able to come back and do another rate filing based on what's called the test year of 2025. So whatever those costs are there, that gives us the time to really start to evaluate the nature of those condominiums. It may be one where, hey, there may be a solution is installing more meters in a system and breaking them down so that it's not one big meter for everybody. It could be multiple meters. There's a number of different ways that we can slice and dice this and really look at it, but it's going to be a collaborative process because, again, there's no one size fits all, and it's very data intensive, and trying to get that as right as we can so that we're not incorrect with it is very difficult right now at this time. So, but message is well received.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
What determines how many meters you have? Like you say, in one condo association, you have one, another one, you have multiple. How's that decided?
It all comes, right, generally, it's when the condos are built. Okay, the developer comes in, and I've had a number of these I'm going to put my former chief engineer hat on, and, okay, developer, how do you want to build your system? Do you want to have your association pay for 100% of it, and then you have a master meter, and we don't have to worry about the water system that's beyond it? It's all yours. We'll just send you a big bill. Others say that, no, we want things like fire protection. We want other things in there, and we want to have multiple buildings where each building might have 6 units, 10 units, has its individual meter. Their call. There's no real requirement. There has been no real requirement at how they sort that out. We do have what we would call standalone, independent condominiums, those that have their own access. You don't have to access through a common door, where they have basements, and every single one of them will have its own individual meter. So they're all, like I said, they're all over the place. And again, it's generally because of how the development was laid out right at the beginning.
And if each unit were given a separate meter, is that an expensive proposition?
Quite a bit, yeah. Well, in two, most of them, a lot of condos, it all depends on whether they have just a crawl space, whether they have a foundation. Some, they don't have any room. The pipes just come in up through the floor and it's served. There's no place to put the meter inside. And the only other alternative is to dig an expensive hole in the street and put what's called a meter pit out there. So if anything, the cost of adding these individual meters, I'm going to go back to some of the recent work we were doing in Litchfield and Londonderry. Doing those service connections inside could cost up to $3,000 to $5,000 to make those retrofits per unit, just because you got to redo a lot of the plumbing to be able to accept them.
Alderman GOV, you had a follow-up on that?
Yeah, just a follow-up to the mayor's point. Like, I can speak for Hollis Crossing where I am. So we have townhouses that are individually metered. Then we have the high-rises, which I'm in one of the high-rises, which they have one bill for each of the high-rise buildings. So each year, every building is paying a different water rate based on the consumption. They average it out. So it's already a pretty confusing process as is, and it means everybody's paying a slightly different HOA rate every month. So it's definitely a high cause of contention, at least in my association.
Just for the record, I want to note that Alderman Lopez joined us via Zoom at 7:45. Next, I have Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam President. Thanks for coming out tonight. I have a few questions about more along the lines of the process and the procedure of where we go. You had mentioned in one of your slides that you first filed a petition in November of '23. It's now September of '24. And knowing the role that Nashua plays in this process, why are we here in September as opposed to maybe January or March of this year? Why, how is that?
It's a good question because, again, when we start to, there are discussions throughout the way, and we have had those discussions once this process started. Now, as part of the formal process, there's an intervenor status, which the city is an intervenor towards this. Part of coming to you with this was, what are we going to say? We don't know. We had, in September, we had some ideas. What we started off in September was quite a bit different than where we're at now. And in order for us to get there, remember I said 484 questions and things like that were really focused primarily on the numbers of where things go back and forth, the concept of the merger. Part of it was coming to you with something that is real and measurable, okay? After all this, what we have to you today is real and measurable. We would have been here talking about the same answers, some of the same questions that we have here, but we would have had to been able to, all we could do is talk about those in the hypothetical. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where the other interveners are going to interject in. We're not sure of how the numbers are going to play out. So yes, we could have had conversations beforehand. Probably should have, but the other thing is we have to consider the nature of the process that we're in and how uncertain it is until we get to a point where we have some more certainty. It wasn't till about a month ago that we were able to the company were to wrap our arms around this rate proposal that reflected some of the desires of all the interveners about affordability and the like. So we were able to get our hands around it then. So we're able to come to you with something tonight that's pretty darn, what we feel as the company, it's pretty darn close to what it's going to end up being if it can move forward.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. Thank you. On the rate structure, the three-tiered rate structure, you got some feedback from my colleague in Ward 1. In Ward 9, where I am, mostly single-family homes. However, I have multi-unit condos, and in those condos, you have folks that are on fixed income, so they're 55 plus. And then, in the other unit, you have folks that are predominantly renters.
Yep.
And my concern after I hear that is that some of these rates are going to go up for the most vulnerable in my part of town. Have you considered hearing the feedback that you have tonight, have you considered other pricing models that may even the playing field for not only the residents, but also, according to what I saw, if my numbers are right, 47% of businesses, because you said 63% use the 14 CCF.
Or less.
But the other 47% are higher than
Right.
that. So yes, residents, but also businesses will shoulder a higher cost as well. Have you considered other pricing models?
The interesting thing obviously with pricing models is that you give it here, it has to come from somewhere. So there is these balances. The one pricing model that we have attempted to really explore was the idea of residential condominiums, apartments, multifamily, and how we can get our hands around the fact that, okay, how many units are there, how much should they be using, and then how much above that should we be charging them more because it's it's either a landlord who's not paying attention to leaks, or they're using water and they have large, recreational or lawns and the like. So we do have an alternative that we're considering, and that we want to work with all parties to be able to try to understand more. But in order to understand it more, we need to manipulate and work the data so that we know that we're comparing it and grabbing apples and apples and oranges, for lack of a better term. Because what's recorded for one area or one condominium in another apartment building, they look different. So are we accurate? Are we getting it right? Now, there could be other ways to look at that too, is say, okay, once we agree that that would be, we investigate it and we look at it, it might be one of those where you have to say, we're going to start here, and then, okay, landlord, we want you to come in and prove that you're not wasting water, you don't have leaks in your system and things like that, so that we can give those lower rates. That could be another way to look at it. But what happens right now is that if I'm an apartment building and I'm wasting water, so to speak, okay, I'm using more than the minimum, which we usually see is about 4 or 5 in apartments, 4 or 5 CCF, and you see it up around 10, 12, 13 per unit. You're rewarding the lack of maintenance, or simply that the water bill isn't such that they don't care. So we want to really look at those things. We are, and agree, I 100% agree. The company is very concerned about that low-income customer, and again, renters. One of the things that came up, if somebody is, I'm a company and I rent, is the landlord, if they see a reduction in their water bill, are they going to really turn it? I don't know. I mean, I kind of think, when we're looking at occupancy and things here, it's, will they actually lower their rates because the water bill goes down? I don't know.
And if I could add to that, just really briefly, one of the things that one of the things is, as you get into some of the larger served, for the apartment buildings or condos, is you have a meter. So let's say your residential single-family home has a 5/8" meter. That's the standard. That's roughly, I will say, $26 a month. When you get into the condos, that's going to be an 1.5" or a 2" meter, a larger meter with a larger cost that's being distributed, sorry about that, amongst those customers. So it's actually, in a lot of cases, less expensive with the larger meter for those individuals in the individual units. Just wanted to.
Thank you.
It's weird. It's a weird anomaly, but, Tara is right, that when you look at that large cost of the meter, it's spread out, and they're all not paying that individual meter charge, which then drives the cost up as well, too.
And just to follow up before I ask my final question, which is, for me, I think to get behind this, I would like to see some real-world data on these multifamily units, what the bill is today and what it would be, same usage and whatnot. I mean, that, to me, that real-world modeling would be very, very important.
That is exactly what we asked ourselves and we asked for. And the unfortunate thing right now, it's going to be a matter of time and sifting through with the different communities and their databases. And that's what we had proposed, is to as part of the settlement and part of this process, is to have that memorialized such that in 2026 we come back and we correct that, or we find a way to move forward with exactly what you're saying, or determine as a group it just doesn't simply work because it's not, what we think isn't there. We don't know enough because we can't sift through that data in a timely manner. But Tara back here, she went through 5 different properties on Saturday. We were back and forth, and it took her several hours, and we still weren't, we had numbers that we just knew weren't right. We had one group of condos that were using 30 CCF per month per unit. We had others that were using 3. And trying to line that up, we knew all the water went through the meter. Okay, how many units are there? Or are they a small number of units and just have a big leak? that they don't care about. We don't know. And it doesn't take much for a toilet leak to add up. Ask some, we get some pretty rough calls when there's a toilet leak and somebody sees their bill go up. So I wish it was real easy. It's going to be a difficult and it's going to be a slog to get through that, but it can be done. And it can be done if we have a bit of time to work with the parties that are involved so that we're all seeing the same thing.
Back to procedure, my last question on this. One slide addressed that, and in the articles of incorporation, that the city can put the kibosh on it if we so choose. But then you also mentioned about the PUC. Hypothetically, if we say yes, can the PUC still say no?
They can, or no, or how should I say this? It's one of those, they will have a ruling, okay? And they could rule that it's not in the public benefit, and yes, it may not go forward. Or it may go back to the drawing board, or we want to see a completely different other idea. So it's always been a concern is that you'd be approving something that you don't know what the final outcome is, but it's structured such that you always have the final say of whether this goes forward. So if there's something that comes out of it, and believe me, we're very comfortable with what we propose, that the numbers are where they need to be, they're accurate, and we can move forward on this. Now, if there's something that comes back that's very different from this, we're going to be standing here in front of you again describing something that's much different. And believe me, if we don't like it, we're going to admit that we don't like it. It's not right. And if it is, we'll still say, we'll be asking you to support it. But you still ultimately, this board of aldermen, have the final say.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Alderman Thibodeau?
I'm assuming that, I shouldn't assume, has an assessment been done, an evaluation on a flat rate?
On a flat.
Instead of a multi-tiered situation here?
It's kind of where we're already at, yes. If you're at a flat rate, if we were to do it, I think, Don, the numbers, flat rate was $5.38 per CCF. Yeah, $5.38.
So it would line up just about where tier two is?
Yeah,
And that would be uniform across
across the board.
across all customers?
Follow-up?
Follow-up. So the Pennachuck Waterworks is owned by Nashua, and this might be just for my own. Pittsfield Aqueduct Company, who owns that? And then who owns the Pennachuck East Utility?
And I want to make sure I get the technical part of it right, so I know there's people here who will correct me. Nashua owns the shares of Pennachuck Corporation, which Pennachuck Corporation owns Pittsfield Aqueduct Company, Pennachuck Waterworks, and Pennachuck East Utility. Plus, we also have a services contract operations company and the remnants of an old land holding company called Southwood, which I think for all intents and purposes, we're hoping to have that completely off the books by the end of the year, because it doesn't do anything anymore.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Madam President. First, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. You said if it doesn't work, meaning when we were talking about the tier system, but by then it's too late because we've already agreed to the merger, correct? So,
Yeah.
okay. So speaking of that, the tier system has absolutely nothing to do with the merger. It's just that's what we would, if we did the merger, you would like the tier system. Is that correct? The merger, they're separate, unique systems, correct?
They are to a degree, but when you look at it, the merger, the tiered rate structure fits very well across all of the utilities. So that large water users, no matter where you are, or non-discretionary users, are paying more for water like they should. It's not the lower users subsidizing and paying for the people who are I'm not saying lawn water are just wasteful, but people who can afford to water their lawn and do so use a lot of water. So there's these synergies that are there because of the merger, okay, as part of this. But you're right, these are really two separate discussions. You could have a merger with a different rate structure. But the way that this works and to be able to work the affordability piece in, and the fact is that we can reduce, on these accounts, that number of accounts. Remember we talked, there's a large number of accounts that use less than 14 CCF, so that's a large number and it wouldn't be surprising that some of those condos that we're talking about fall within that less than 14 or less. But we'd have to work those numbers through.
May I
Yes, please.
And I will tell you, I looked at my bill, and looking from before July on, I will agree with you. Personally, we used less than 14 for every month. Embarrassingly, I will say July on, we used more than that, and that was from watering our lawn. So, having said that. But I have a unique situation in my ward. I do have lots of multifamilies, and I have homes that were turned into, but I also have this very unique 3 properties on 110 Concord Street of A, B, and C, where they have that 1 meter, and then these 3 houses, separate homes are kind of connected. That would be one of those really unusual kind of things that they can't separate. They just get that one bill and separate up those homes, so.
I think I remember that one.
Yeah, that one's a
okay.
very, very kind of unique situation, and that one would be very, so I guess my feeling is that we're going to do this test, and then we find out, and so on. So I kind of agree with my colleagues as far as that's concerned. We're kind of doing this test and finding out. I don't disagree that, because you all are very trustworthy as far as, most people are under the 14 CCFs, and, looking at my bills and so on, I can't disagree with that until I went into this year. I know last year was a very wet summer, but when I look at this year, I agree that most of the time I am below 14 CCFs. But I did have some other questions, and one of them I think has kind of been brought up. We could do the merger, we could do this, all of this and so on, and so on, and we're not guaranteed that the others still aren't going to pick up and leave.
You are
Right.
not. You never,
Right.
in reality, you never are.
Right.
But with the type of rates and the rate relief, that you're starting to see, the likelihood, the economics kind of fall away from there.
And I think that's it for now, Madam President. Thank you.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, now to the elephant in the room. City of Nashua uses a lot of water. All of our athletic fields, our 2 high schools, our 3 intermediate schools are all have irrigation systems.
The fire hydrants. Fire hydrants.
Fire hydrants are
Fire
different. That's a different animal.
That's a whole different animal.
Yeah,
It's a big
that's-
cost.
That's a fixed cost for fire hydrants. And also the fire training center. And if we put a building in and start using washing to wash down our trucks to save them and save money for the city, that's going to use water.
Yeah, you're also.
I
your
gotta believe that
your
you're
wastewater
in the
treatment
higher
plant
rate.
uses it too.
Now,
as
that
well.
higher rate, which costs an increased cost to the city, gets passed on to the taxpayers. How are you going to address that?
So let me get that question again. Can you ask that question again?
The city of Nashua uses an extensive amount of water, and I'm figuring it falls in that 47% where we're going to get a higher rate. So our bill for water in the city, as a city, is going to go up substantially,
Yep.
and that goes back to the taxpayers.
does.
First of all, we need to know what the hell that number is.
And we actually have them
And-
broken out by account. Well, we can get you that, Alderman Dow. We certainly have that information. You can know what your bills are.
I can say that if our tax rate's going up because of changes in the water rate, people aren't going to like that.
Sure, yep.
So, I want to address the issue of just that question, because what we often forget is, like you said, ratepayers and taxpayers are one and the same. So what we want to look at is what's cumulatively best for them. I think the numbers, and I'm gonna try to find them, is that the city's municipal bill associated with the tiered rate would go up, I think the number's about $150,000. So that's for the year. That's a big number. But the average single-family residential usage in Nashua is 7.6 CCF. So if I put in 8 into the model and we see what you're paying now, and you've got 20+ thousand customers, so this is a monthly savings to them. They're currently paying $66, they would be down at 61. That's a $5 saving times 20,000, that's 100,000 a month savings. That's 1.2 million. So if the city is looking at the impact on their customers, you gotta look at it cumulatively, right? So you're gonna pay 150,000 more, but if this merger goes through, that single-family residential customer, that group's gonna save 1.2 million. So is it worth spending 150,000 to save 1.2 million? They're different pockets, and we often see this. Oh, well, your tax bill is gonna go up. Oh, yeah, but your water bill went down. And so that is one of those challenges. And again, I'm gonna go back to that, the average 5/8 inch single-family residential bill is at that rate of it's 7.61 CCF. We bill on whole CCF, so I use the 8. And at that, under this merger, if you took that, and that's around 20,000 single-family residential customers, and looking where Tara is, that's that number where you're saving, the difference is a little over $5 less for their bill under this. Now, again, as we discussed, other people's bills are going to go up, the commercials and industrials. This inclining block rate structure, again, started with the concept of conservation. Across the country, it's being now adopted to address affordability for the smaller customer. And Rick, again, the real challenge has been that multifamily residential. And initially, we thought, let's go with an idea that if there are 10 units, if we could prove that out, that instead of 7, it's a single meter, that they would get the first 70 units in a month at that lowest tier, because that's 0 to 7, and the next 13 units at 130. Sounded simple in concept. Then Tara spent an enormous amount of time talking not only with the city but others, and trying to line those records up and figure out how many units there are and which are on, single meters, and verifying all that information becomes very difficult. And we did see the fact that on some of the larger meters, I don't want to use complexes, but where there's a single meter for a big complex, where the usage per unit was like 15, in one case 30 in another. That's huge when the average single family uses 7. But a 1 gallon a minute leak in a toilet is 2 CCF a day. In a period of a moment, that's 60 CCF. So it doesn't take very much. If your toilet's leaking at your house, likely you're going to fix it. Although it'll be a silent leak, typically you're not going to hear it, but you'll know it. The cost of water, apparently, and again, there's a lot more data to look at. In some cases, it's not enough for people to concern themselves with. I ran a standard 48-unit building with a 2-inch meter, and the impact if you went to this tiered pricing per unit is not inconsequential. It's about $8 a month. But if you look at the cost per unit because of the larger meter, that multifamily, the individual units paying $29.23 for their usage versus the same amount of usage for a single family, because it goes through 1 meter, is $48. So the fact is they're paying $9 less under that scenario because they're sharing that meter, and that 2-inch meter cost a lot less than the 5/8 inch meters at $29 versus 1 2-inch meter at $232 a month. And those are the types of things. But ultimately, if we could line up the number of units to the building, to the meter, that would be I hate to say, in my perfect world, so I'm speaking for me, the way to do this most fairly relative to the residential customer. That's what we had hoped we could do very quickly. We found out it will be months of effort, which is why we said, okay, we got to get to step one so that we can get on to step two, which is have the time to work with the city, the towns where there are multifamilies, and figure out how we track that, and when it changes, how we track that. And you know, as John showed you in those numbers, during the winter months, and it's very important to say, we look at things on a winter month basis. Because, for instance, a pool, the industry as a whole would consider that to be a discretionary use, right? You don't have to have a pool. And I realize it's a selling point, okay? But the goal is, when we look at setting that first tier, it was to capture the non-discretionary use that John talked about: flushing the toilet, washing your clothes, washing your dishes, you know, washing your hands, taking your showers, using it for cooking. And that's where the people who are in the lowest quartile, who are struggling to meet their bills, that's all they're using. They're not watering a lawn, they're not filling a pool, you know, so on and so forth. So as we got into this, we came up with the idea of the tiering, where we would capture in those first two tiers essentially 99% of all residential usage during the winter falls in those first two tiers, but 83% of it falls in the first tier. You know, what about that group in the 8 to 14? What we have is the individual bills at each rate. So you could have a bill of 12 where the house has a leak, but it shows up as one of those bills that are issued. So that's where we were, and if we could, you know, I don't want to use the term magically, but if we could magically line up the meter, you know, I'll use Kessler Farm. I think Tara thinks there's roughly 200 meters in there. Okay, so those will be looked at. Each one of those will get the tiering, which is stepped. Just like taxes, you don't suddenly, when you go from 7 to 8, you don't go from $3.85 to $5.38 for all the usage. You get the first 7 at the $3.85, then the next 13 at $5.86. If you go over 20, then you're getting that at that proposed, and again, we're talking proposed rate still, at $7.01.
So, at Kessler Farm, you're right, they're over 200 meters. And we used to get a bill that had 200 bills from Penachuk, and we negotiated with you guys to get a single bill. Because when I was president, I used to have to sign 200 checks. You can figure out what that is. So, and the condo association picks up the tab for water. So it's part of your condo fee. So the individual user doesn't have any idea any of the rates relative to water. Also, back to the offset with lower water bill versus taxes, you're making the assumption that people are going to correlate the two. And I would be shocked if they did, and say, and then you'd have to prove that, okay, I $8 less on my water bill, but my taxes went up less than $8. Yeah, I don't know about that. And the people that are going to complain the most are the ones who get sucked into the second tier, and their taxes went up. Same thing with businesses. When they get sucked into the higher tier, and now their taxes go up. So that's the issue that we would have to address here as a Board of Aldermen with the budget process.
Alderman Senate.
Thank you, Madam President. More comments than I think questions. I will start with a question. I do appreciate that you've emphasized that the rates that you're presenting here are proposed rates. They're not final. This would be my first conversion with a utility such as Penachuk. If these rates were to vary from what we have in front of us right now to, say, final PUC approval, what could that look like?
Ooh. No crystal ball here.
Understood.
Right. But I do think I can say there's been a number of eyes that have looked at this. The feedback, you know, in especially the intervening parties have had this in front of them for a little bit of time now. We had a discussion about these a while back. Can't really commit to exactly what was being said. But the interveners and the parties involved felt comfortable with us on our behalf. These are our numbers, Pennachuck's numbers, that we can step forward and present these to you, even though we're in a part of the process where it's still a negotiation. These are our numbers, these are what we propose, and there's still a discussion. And I wish I had a little bit more clearer answer to that, but I have to be very sensitive to the process that we're in right now.
Of course.
Yep.
Follow up?
Yes.
Again, my first conversion with a major utility. Assuming this does get PUC approval and comes to us for the final say, we would have finite numbers in front of us at that time.
Very much so, yes.
I do share some of the concerns of my colleagues, especially Alderman Gouveia, who, indicated the makeup of his ward. My ward is such that you could stand out in the middle of one of our busier streets, you'd probably get struck by a speeding vehicle, but you'd look at, 20 to 30 different properties with 20 to 30 different situations. I live in a much older neighborhood that's comprised probably of a multifamily unit for every single-family owner-occupied unit that you would have to match it up with. I'd like to think that in the interest of parity and equity, that, when those units were divided, they were set up with separate meters. I've rented long enough to know that that's not the case. And I do just worry about the multitude of families in my neighborhoods that, could be looking at what's a really good deal right now. I found this great apartment that, includes heat and hot water, and now they're looking at a significant increase because that's a 5-unit property with 1 meter. So I just want that to be taken into consideration. I know that's a real tough nut to crack, but I'd like to see some more information to sell this to my constituents, because for those constituents, that's going to be a hard sell when there's that degree of uncertainty. Thank you.
Alderman Thibodeau?
Just a comment, I hear the discretionary usage but that's reflected in your average bill. If you're a person that takes a 5-minute shower and a family that takes 15-minute showers, your bill's obviously going to be higher regardless. So I find interest in the comments about discretionary usage and needing to be into a higher tier because you're already going to pay more because you're utilizing more.
Right, and when we looked at, if you looked at the number, we still, the situation that you described, we do have we have numbers on single-family residents, which that's where we have the best numbers on. There are one of us, when we started to look at this, we wanted to set that idea of the 7, and that normally it averages around 5.19 or something to that effect, but we started to see these, especially if you added one extra kid to the equation. There's that many more washes, that many more things that started to push it in the 7, and there are some that will venture over that 7. But the factor that we're pleased with, at least at the 14 CCF, no matter, even though you're in that higher tier, your bill was still going to be less than what it is today.
That encompasses 97%
Yep.
of the
Nine-
bills that are issued to single-family
They can't hear you
Yeah.
unless you go to the microphone.
97.
That encompasses 97%. We've talked about how do we get at the right numbers. Again, I say we, that is really the royal we. Kara started working with folks at the city, at towns, trying to compare data, and it was a tough slog. You got 2,700 multifamily. So if you put it into perspective, there are 40,000 accounts, and of those, 2,700 are multifamily. And those will have to be gone through one at a time, may involve having to meet with people on site to get a real handle on how many units there are. because again, the data doesn't line up at all. The data in the city's database, which Tara can talk about, doesn't line up with our meter account information. Part of that is because renters can have individual water meters, but renters can't have a bill, the property tax, for instance, set up in their name. It has to be the actual owner of the property because of lien rights and other things. And so our first pass was, yeah, the idea of tiering, of taking those tiers and multiplying times the number of units to come up with how, based on each meter to count, sounded great. When reality met the road, it's like, this is going to take a long time, not a month, not 2 months, but, we thought, and it's going to take a concentrated effort, probably, quite possibly bringing in a consultant. That was the idea, as during that first year out, we would work on that. In the meantime, as it was pointed out, when you look at the wintertime consumption, and we use, again, Nashville, all the numbers John has, talked about a number of times, in the multifamilies during the winter months, 73% use less than the 20 CCF. And as you get into the bigger usage, they typically have a shared meter, which then on a per unit, instead of paying a 5/8 inch meter, about $26. If you go to a 3/4 inch meter that might handle 3 or 4 units, that is only about $38. So divide that, and now you're paying $10. So you may be paying a little more on the per CCF, but it's really the big units that, where Rick mentioned, if you have a single meter for a big unit, it could result in a $7 or $8 a month increase for water under that circumstance. It could be more, especially from some of the preliminary data where we said that it appears that people are not paying attention to the water usage, whoever the landlord is. They've gotten used to seeing, the equivalent of 30 units being used per month times their 30 units that are there. So they're seeing a bill for 900 units, and it's not enough to disturb them. And nobody's gone back and say, the average apartment usage across the United States is about 5 CCF per month, per unit. Those are numbers from AWWA. So how do you get to 30, and why isn't somebody paying attention to that? Because we started the idea of, well, maybe you give a flat rate initially while you do this work to the multifamilies. And make it the lowest rate because you want to try to take care of those people. But then as John mentioned earlier, you're rewarding the bad behavior of the landlord who isn't, and maybe it's not even bad behavior. Some people aren't paying attention, a drip on the faucet here, the toilet running there, and it's just not being reported. It's a tough one. And the multifamily that's kind of the hole that we've been struggling to fill, and it's going to take some time to fill that. We've stayed out of rates for a substantial period of time, in particular in PU and PAC, to try to craft a solution. We can't wait around for another year for that to happen. Again, as John mentioned, we raise our money to cover our expenses. The rates in Pennachuck East were established on the expenses that it incurred in 2018. And we're collecting the revenues based on those expenses. So, but we held off on filing that rate case because, again, as John mentioned earlier, the 3 utilities, the way they were formed, they were totally artificial lines. Pennachuck Waterworks consists of, I think it's 19 different water systems, or more than 23 different water systems across 11 different communities. Newmarket, Milford, up Derry, Epping, Plastow, and intermixed with those are utilities from Pennachuck East. Why are they separate? If you're a customer of Eversource and you're in Nashville, are you paying the same rate for electricity on the transmission side as if you are up in Berlin? Yes, you are. And part of that, you want to go back to, again, the whole thought process. the electrification of rural America was structured on the fact that it was a good idea for people to have electricity. But you couldn't electrify rural America without the public works program that went on and without a sharing of the cost of those assets. That's really where we are right here. Over time, a bunch of systems were cobbled together by the former owner of this company, but they're all there together. The 65 systems are all there together. Some of them are connected, some of them are separate, but they're all run by the same group of people doing the same thing. And if you looked at each individual entity, I will tell you, in some cases, Nashua's costs are higher than some smaller utilities, and others they're less. So it varies all over the place. And the idea here is to create a stable utility with one rate focused on affordability for the residential customer, which is the theory in the majority of water utilities today in the genesis of the inclining block rate structure. The donut hole is the multifamily units. And if we could slay that beast tomorrow, we would. But it's just not that easy. But as we look at it, it's a lift, but it's not a huge lift for most of these. And I'm an apartment dweller in Nashville, by the way. And I've seen my apartment rates go up $200 a month a year for the last 3 years. They haven't made any investment in there. I don't pay my water, I don't pay my sewer, but I pay my gas and electricity. I don't see this driving things for a year. What it may do is some of the larger units may start looking around for leaks. In the meantime, we coordinate and we work together, assessors or building codes folks from Nashua and Londonderry and Bedford and places where they're multifamily, and figure out how we can get the right data to come up with the right way to apportion rates that doesn't reward people who are using more than they should because they're not paying their water bill.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Madam President. So I have a quick question, and maybe the mayor has this or Director Cummings. Like, what percentage of our housing block, if you will, would be of these developments that are, I don't know, say 25 or 50 units, these higher density builds?
We do have that information. Tim texted it to me, actually. 20% of our housing stock is 50%, is 50 units or more, buildings with, or complexes with 50 units or more.
If I could follow
Wait,
up on
but
that.
he's coming up. Let him, he may have more than that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the body. So very quickly, in the RKG study that we did back in 2020, so some of this is a little old and dated, but in the 2020 housing report card that we did, our housing stock was essentially 20% multifamily, defined as 50 units or more, 10 units or more of 25%. So essentially a quarter of the city of Nashua's residents live in some sort of multifamily housing.
I
Alderman
could just
Govea.
follow up with a thought on that. So hearing these statistics and looking at how the rates were kind of tiered and looking at the other communities that Pennachuck serves, to me, it really seems like the rate hikes are going to be felt more in Nashua than any other community. These other communities don't have as many dense builds as we do. So there are a lot of single-family housing out there. So they're going to be in this lower tier. They're going to receive a lower rate, which there's a lot of single-family in Nashua too. I'm not saying there isn't. But I'm saying that the big chunk of this is going to be felt by us and our residents compared to the residents who have these services in the smaller towns that are the single-family homes. So I think that's, once again, just kind of goes to my point that this is a really tough sell when we're looking at it as a company as a whole. I understand why you would want to do it, but from the point that I come from, which is I was elected by the residents of Nashua, and the other communities don't elect me back in. So my first interest is going to be Ward 1 Nashua and Nashua as a whole. And this is once again still a tough sell, knowing that 25% of our housing stock is these people who will be affected the most. And I don't have any statistical proof, but I'm willing to bet pretty big that these surrounding communities are not at that number of 25% when they look at their housing stock.
Alderman Clee, did you have another question?
No, I think I'm going to hold on that.
Okay.
So-
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, one other thing, we're talking about usage and toilets leaking and all that other stuff. I don't know about other people. I got inundated from the gas company and electric company on ways to save electricity or gas. Do you do any mailings to the residents on how to avoid, like if you got a leaky toilet, it's gonna cost you this many units of water, which is this much money? Because I don't think I've ever received any.
Yeah, so we do. Twice a year, we do newsletters in the bills that one with some kind of conservation tip, whether it's indoor or outdoor, depending on the time of year. We also post things on Facebook. We have a bunch of conservation information on our website, as well as a water calculator, so you can see if your usage, how you're using your water. We also, if we're reviewing during our billing process, if we see that your usage is outside of the norm of what you would normally use, we're gonna call you or send you a letter that says, okay, we've seen your usage be this, and there's something else going on. Maybe you filled a pool, maybe you're watering, but in a lot of cases, that is a leak. And then we work with people to help them determine, is it really a leak where it is? And then,
I would say a vast majority of people aren't checking websites for anything, actually. But
the information's all available and it goes out in the bills. Unfortunately, the customers also, there's a very small percentage who read the inserts that go in the bills. So we try to make it available, is my point,
So,
in multiple
when you
platforms.
send bills to condo associations, the management company takes it and throws it in the trash. So your residents don't get to see it. So you'd be better off with doing a resident mailing than following up on bills, because
Well, that's why we
the
post it
condo
on.
association, unless, they want to take, I can tell you the management companies care less.
We unfortunately don't have the resident information of this, we only have our customer information, so that's who we're sending any materials to. But that is also why we have it available electronically. So as a resident who's not a customer, you can get access to that information. But unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to send something to somebody if they weren't a customer. We don't have that information.
I can attest to the fact that Pennachuck will call you if you've had a leaking toilet for 3 weeks that went undetected, because I've experienced it somewhere. Leave it at that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's just when that leaking toilet has been going on for the last 5 or 10 years, it doesn't show up as being abnormal. And the billing won't pick it up.
Right. John, what is the timeline? What are the next steps?
Let's see, who's, Dawn, you get the timeline right there? I just want to make sure I give them the right dates. Or Marcia? Yep. 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 Okay, I want to make sure I get it right.
So, I'll start out by saying one of the challenges is we're going to call it the chicken and egg. Because from the very beginning, in fact, the Public Utilities Commission last December, staff, the DOE staff said, we don't want to work on this unless Nashua tells us they're going to approve it. At that stage, you have nothing to discuss. And we said we have to get far enough along the way and get a body of agreement amongst the interveners, which currently are the town of Bedford, the town of Londonderry, the town of Litchfield, the Office of the Consumer Advocate, and the DOE staff, and the city of Nashua. So those parties have all been party to the process all along, which is, as mentioned, a series. You do a filing, which this combined filing initially went in November of last year. The DOE staff got it thrown out. They said, you can't consider rates before you have a merger. But then it came up that you can't have a merger that has to be approved by a body that doesn't understand its impact on its constituents. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? So through this process, we wanted to reach a point where we are right now, which is had a number of technical sessions, the last one being termed a settlement session, to come up with terms, which, as John said, we can't disclose, but we put together a term sheet based on everything that we heard that we believe is something that would be acceptable, because we still have the interveners in particular saying, we don't want to spend any more time on getting to a settlement document, which will take about 2 months. So the settlement document is due October 31st to the Public Utilities Commission, who plans to have a hearing sometime in mid-November. Okay. So the settlement agreement, well, to file that settlement agreement, the interveners are supposed to sign off on it. Right now, again, the interveners have seen our proposal, there's been discussions, there's general acceptance of the concept. But they want to hear from Nashua before they work any further whether, Nashua's going to approve this. So the process that John had developed along with various people, including the city, was that you need to have your first reading, go to the water committee, have a second reading, and during that month, if we gotta, continue to pursue this, doesn't commit you to anything, that we would then come to final terms, that by the time the second reading happened in the middle of November, middle of October, which is before the settlement document is, the city would then have the real numbers that everybody had agreed to. Somebody mentioned, well, what if the Public Utilities Commission doesn't agree with the settlement? And I can only turn to my attorneys, I've been involved in this business for many years. We've always reached a settlement with the interveners, and we've never had the commission do anything with the settlement. But there's a poison pill in there. If the commission were to issue an order that totally flipped what the settling parties had agreed to and what Nashua had voted for, it dies. You don't have to accept that. That would be memorialized in the settlement agreement. Says that, if this isn't taken as it is as a whole, we reserve the right not to settle. And so, but again, it's this chicken and egg concept. So right now we're at a point where parties have met, conceptually agreed to the framework that John presented, and now the first question is, well, where's Nashua on this? John now finally had something he could bring to you, at least for consideration, understanding the big hole, which we're all struggling with, which is the multifamily. And when all the parties have been talking, it's unclear, but it's like, okay, conceptually, we like that idea, but how do we get there and not make a mistake and for a year, do something that doesn't make a lot of sense from a rate perspective? So conceptually, we have an idea. In an ideal world, the way the schedule is set up tonight, you'd be okay, subject to the concerns you heard, the idea of a merger to create a more stable utility, which, by the way, has a benefit to the city. John mentioned, from a capital perspective, the most capital that is going to be spent on a per-customer basis is in the city of Nashua. Why? It's the oldest infrastructure. It started in 1853. Most of these small systems were built in the 1970s or 80s. There's not going to be a lot of investment in those for quite some time. But there's that sharing of the infrastructure cost that's going to be beneficial to Nashua. We thought, again, if we get the rate structure right, it's going to be beneficial to the majority of residential customers, if not all the residential customers, when we finally figure out how to handle the multifamily. And so, again, we're here, John came here, the board is here, because we need the city to give some consent to move forward with the idea. A month from now, we got to come back, because people are not going to, what I'm hearing from the interveners, it does not appear the interveners, and I can't speak for them, would be interested in signing a settlement agreement if the city hasn't said that they're going to approve this as well. That was right from the beginning. That's why the case was originally thrown out last December, because the DOE staff said we have to have a merger before we can talk about rates. but you couldn't talk about vote on a merger without knowing what those rates are. And the commission, for its part, finally consented and said, do your filing, and we'll do the two together. But we are at that point, as John has said, where we need, you know, the city to decide whether we should be pursuing this further.
And I just want to kind of say one kind of thing to follow up on that. There is an alternative to this. And it's what we would have to do, and what, right now, without any further discussion, and that would be, we'd be obligated to file 3 individual rate cases for each of the 3 utilities. And what we've already saying now is we've set up a structure for the city of Nashua, you know, that covers a lot of the city of Nashua, that actually reduces water rates for a lot of people. Now, it doesn't get to everybody, but the next step is to file an individual rate case where the rates will be going up for everybody. It's just the cost of there, and if you looked at the numbers, because of everything that's aggregated, those costs will be higher than what they are right now. So we're trying to make it so that we can keep it affordable, but if we go back to what we already were, the rates under the current structure, the rates are going to go up for everybody. It's just, that's where the numbers are. That's where the costs are. So, I mean, that's really all I can say. And like Don said, I think we'd like to get a sense of, do we still continue to push this and move it forward? Because there could be, you know, a different result on the other side. That's what we're asking for. You know, where do we go from here?
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Madam President. John, just a couple of quick questions, and thank you for your last comment about the alternate, because I know that right now our current price is between that Tier 1 and Tier 2, here in Nashua anyways, our current price is between those two. And I did have a question about if there was a current rate increase on the horizon, and you answered that question. But you talked about I think the QPAC, I think you called it.
QCPAC, yep.
QCPAC,
Qualified
yeah.
Capital
And
Project
you said that
Additional
you would go from 3 or 2 to 1. And you said the cost of that, because the legal fees and so on, is there a significant cost of having to file 2 or 3 of those versus having to file one large one of those?
That's to answer your question, yeah, it doesn't matter how small they are. You go through the same process. There may be a little fewer back and forth with respect to questions and things, because some of the smaller utilities, you know, that don't have as many projects that we have to work through. But essentially, the administrative cost, whether you file it for a large utility or small utility, is essentially very close to being the same. You have to go through that process, and it's really process-driven, Alderman Clee.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said that whether you stay as you are now or we merged, that the cost of your operation in total isn't significantly changed. You said something like 100,000 or something.
Yeah, if you looked at the way when we combine all of the utilities, the revenue requirement is somewhere around $53 million to run everything, pay for all of our debt, pay the fixed bond that we have with the city, you know, treat the water, everything else, to do exactly what we have right now. And during this process, when we were looking at that revenue requirement, when we started off with a number, but that number only moved about $100,000 through all of the discovery as we made sure that all the accounting was ticked off and everything. So we didn't move that needle hardly at all during this process. So the numbers are all, you know, really good as to what it takes to run the utility.
So if I may, Madam President?
Alderman Clee.
Oh, thank you. So ultimately, in ultimately, in your opinion, and the case that you're trying to make is that operation-wise and so on, this does not affect you, but you feel that a merger creates more stability for the company and overall better rates. But the sticking point here for Nashua, and I hear from my colleagues, is that the multi-unit. I mean, if you could work through that before going any further, you may have a better chance. And I think that truly is going to be your Achilles heel.
So I do think, and I guess if we haven't asked, is for you to have us take another shot at that. We got to come back to the Special Water Committee. We got to go through another process. Let us try to do a little bit more running the ground on that. I'm not saying that we're going to be in a more perfect world when we get through this, but we might understand and be able to report to you what those issues really are. The other thing that, and again, this is kind of thinking, it may be we will never get those exact numbers. And so you might have to set certain, how should I say this? Start out charging people more only for them to come back and say, hey, wait a second, those aren't my numbers. And maybe do readjustments over time. Because we're going to get, even if we look at all the records right, we're going to have somebody who's going to come back and say, I don't have 6 units, I only have 4. I don't have, I don't have 10, I have 8. So we're going to be going through a process that's probably going to be iterative when we get into this as well, too. But we can probably take a solid shot, but I can't guarantee that we're going to be able to uncover without a little bit more digging.
And I think, not speaking for the board, but I think what we're looking for is to get a grasp on the multifamily.
Yep.
Before we can say continue with the rest. I mean,
Okay.
that seems to be what most of us are agreeing on this evening.
It's very fair. It's a very fair understanding, and certainly it's something that we've been wrestling with too. And at this point in time, we would have liked to have had that wrapped up, but the information and the data is not there for us to say. We're probably going to be wrong way more than we're right on it right now until we can get things sorted out.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, 2 questions. One, the Corporation Council, what kind of action would it take from the city of Nashua and the board to authorize this? A legislation, resolution, or?
Yeah, resolution. I think it would be complicated, and you'd want to have a description of the rates that you're agreeing to. And it probably, if we get to that, incorporate some of the terms that we will insist on being in the settlement agreement.
Yeah, I think we'd leave that detail to you and your staff. But the other
That'd be
thing is, if this were to go in effect, the increased rates, when would the rates change for the ratepayers? Is it going to be like the 1st of January?
That's
Is it going to
correct.
be like the July? or
1st of January is where this is all set to kick off.
Okay, so again, like, I don't know about all the condo associations. I know our budgets start in July. And if you hit a condo association with a substantial increase mid-year, it's a real problem. So you need to take that into effect, and you need to work on how do you address these multi-unit properties. So, and my friend John Sullivan, I think we want to see it in more number detail.
We do
Right,
too.
John?
We do too.
I think they've
What he
got the
said.
message at this point about multifamily, so
Yeah.
we can beat a dead horse, or we can just,
Yep.
at this point, that's what we'd like to see. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate all of you being here. You can?
Yes.
Alderman Clee?
Yes, I just wanted to let everybody from the Pennachuck Special Water Committee committee to know that there is and the members of the board and the public, that there is a special Pennachuck Water Committee meeting, that the legislation will be heard at that meeting, but the next Board of Aldermen meeting is when the legislation will be brought forward for the first time.
I think that's a little premature.
Okay.
I will tell you, no one has asked me to write any legislation
Yeah.
up to now.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I
I
that was
mean,
in the schedule.
by next Wednesday, it's unlikely that any legislation is going to be ready.
Then I take it all back. I apologize.
Just so you know.
I thought that's what we had agreed on.
Alderman O'Brien. Have a
Motion to adjourn. Madam President, I would like to make a motion to adjourn of the September 12, 2024 special meeting of the Board of Aldermen. So be adjourned.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:53 PM.